Carlos, that was quite an introduction. I was kind of like doing this back there. You know, isn't it great to be in Washington, D.C.? I mean, you look around at the beautiful structures in Washington, D.C. We're here in beautiful weather that we're having, but what a great experience. We're here in Washington, D.C. It's our nation's capital. It's the birthplace of democracy, and we're here at a very important election day today. I mean, how many times do people have that opportunity? Plus, we got to hear from Cokie Roberts yesterday to really hear the insight. How was that, folks? I mean, what a great way to kick off the conference. You know, Carlos mentioned, I am so pleased to have in attendance 53 of our 55 jurisdictions. It's been a lot of years since we've had that kind of representation at a NASBA meeting, and it feels so great to know that you want to be involved in NASBA and you're getting to meet your peers from around the country. You know, as CEO, I have less opportunity than I used to get out to state boards of accountancy, you know, to visit with you face to face. I used to be selling stuff like mobility. Remember those days when I was coming to visit you? You know, I told Dan Dustin the other day, our Vice President of State Board Relations, that I'm almost jealous of his job because in the last few months I've got to do that a little bit, and it's a great opportunity to really kind of sit down with the folks at home and really talk about the issues that are in front of you. But this is the State of NASBA report from the President, and I want to tell you that NASBA is strong, NASBA is relevant, and we are well poised for the future. You know, we've had back-to-back years, you heard Kent Small's report, back-to-back years of record financial success, and more importantly, we continue to increase the direct support that we give to you, our state boards of accountancy. We also continue to build alliances, we build relationships, trusting relationships with federal agencies, with fellow regulators, AICPA, stakeholders around the world. They know who NASBA is, and we are more relevant because of that, and that really makes state boards more relevant all around the world. You know, before I really kind of get into a little bit of the meat of my presentation, you know, I want to talk a little bit about Carlos Johnson. In front of you is a little tribute to Carlos Johnson, and I want to thank the Oklahoma Society of CPAs for allowing us to share that with you. It was in their magazine. You know, Carlos and Pam are great people, and Sheila and I have had a lot of wonderful experiences through the year, but in some ways, knowing the man who's bigger than life and reading stories like that, I shared that with every member of our staff, to know how someone who rose from humble beginning to achieve the things that he's achieved in his life. You know, he clearly set a new example of accountability and governance for NASBA, something important to him. He took us to new lofty places in the world of accounting education, someplace we've really never been. And he also continued to work down the path of identifying leadership and also to say, we're going to walk the walk on diversity. So help me join one more time thanking Carlos Johnson for the wonderful job that he has done this year. You know, last year, oh, by the way, I want to congratulate Walter Davenport, the people that are elected, the honorees that won the awards. I got to tell you, Mark Harris approached me earlier today and he said, do you realize about 3.5 years ago, it was in this hotel that he, Michael Daggett, and I sat down and I accepted and signed the contract to become your CEO. So this is an important hotel. I hope it is important to you that we're elected today, that you too were chosen to your positions in the nation's capital. You know, but thank you, Mark. You know, and I'll give Mark another credit for this part of it. Last year when I finished my speech, I used President's memos as a part of my presentation. And Mark walked right up to me after the presentation and said, I really like you using those memos. You should do that again next year. So Mark, this is for you. We're doing President's memos. No, actually, in front of you also in that report are 4 President's memos that are directly related to some of the things that I want to talk to you about. Now, the first one is a story called I Am Not a Turf Guy. You know, Carlos wasn't the only poor guy in the room. In fact, a couple of you have approached me at this meeting and said, you know, I read that article, and guess what? I was even poorer than you. Well, I will tell you that David Costello, and that's what's written in this article, David Costello and I used to take almost every morning we'd talk about a poor story. Who was the poorest? I remember one morning he came in and he said, you know, Ken, I was so poor I slept on the floor. And I said, you had a floor? You know? So, but anyway, the point of this article was this. David, Carlos, myself, even though we came from humble beginnings, we were never jealous of others. In fact, we were motivated by others who had achieved more. And similarly, I'm not jealous of other organizations. I am not a turf guy. But sometimes as an organization, we do tend to be a little bit turfish. You know, often I hear criticism of a standard, of a framework, of an exam, of a peer review process, whatever it is, not based on the quality of it, which is fair, but where it resides, who owns it, who's doing it. Well, NASBA should be very, very interested in the high quality, and when we use any of those instruments to regulate accountancy in our home states, we should really care a lot about the quality of those things, and we should be participating in the processes to develop those, but we shouldn't be too caught up in the turf, and that was the point of the article. I'm going to take you back in history, and I don't want to go negative here, but in 2001 in Chicago, many of you were probably there, we had a meeting in Chicago on May 10 to talk about the CPA examination, and NASBA and AICPA at that particular time were pretty far apart. And what the meeting was about was, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to pull together? 9 states at that meeting said NASBA should take over the CPA exam. Well, that would have created calamity. That would have created an awful lot of division, not only between societies, state boards, AICPA and NASBA, but certainly we were interested in those state boards' opinions. But instead of doing that, cooler heads prevailed, and we sat down and we wrote a 10-year contract, or actually a longer contract than that, with 3 parties, and look how successful that has been. Now then, after 10 years, millions of test takers, that partnership between NASBA, AICPA, and Prometric has served the profession so well and has been high quality, the premier exam in the world. I think that we can transfer that level of trust, that level of cooperation across other areas in the spectrum of what we do in accounting, and we won't be lowering the bar at all, folks. We're just not going to be talking about turf. We're going to be talking about how can NASBA contribute effectively to the quality of those types of instruments that we use. The segue is very nice to the second President's memo that you have in front of you, and it was called Reviving the Uniform and the UAA, the Uniform Accountancy Act. You know, in this memo, I took you back to my law enforcement experience. Some of you remember when they passed the law that it was okay to turn right on red. Remember that? You could stop at stop sign. You still can. Almost every state now you can have it. New York City you cannot, but in every state and most cities you can do that. I remember when that law was passed, and many of you do as well. When you visited other states and you pulled up to a red light, you hesitated because you went, I wonder if I can turn right in this state. You know, it may be against the law. I might put myself in harm's way. I might put someone else in harm's way. Well, that is what the lack of uniformity does to CPAs traveling around the United States and the world through mobility if they're not sure they can turn right on red. You know, if they don't know what the rules are in that state, are they using a different code of conduct? Are they using a different set of rules? So that is why it's so important that we have your trust, that we put you, our leaders who sit on those committees, and we look for every single effort to make the Uniform Accountancy Act so good and so right that every single state wants to adopt it. You know, we have now, it was talked about today, 52 states. When Puerto Rico passed mobility, we now have 52 states and territories that have mobility. But we still have inconsistency, disparate laws, and rules impacting practice privileges so that when those people move around the world, around the country, they don't know exactly what they're going to run into. I think we can do better than that. Now, I will tell you, as long as I'm president and CEO of NASBA, I will always stand behind state rights. If you choose not to go that way, I'm going to be standing behind you, but I'm going to be trying to persuade you. Not like Big Mike said from Washington, D.C., I'm not going to be twisting your arm, but I am going to try to be persuasive to say, let's really consider that middle ground. How can we get together? There are several important issues: code of conduct, return of client records, inactive retired CPAs. We've been stuck on some of these issues for over a decade, sometimes 20 years. It's time that we figure out ways to work together, trust one another, talk to one another, and try to get to the same place so that CPAs are not, and more importantly, the people that use CPAs are not in harm's way. Ties to my next one, doing right things and doing it right. You know, also through the years, and by the way, a lot of you commented about this one as well, because I guess many of the men in the room, the women in the room, have had a parent or a grandparent or an uncle that they really look to for their advice. My old Grandpa Wilson took a lot of time to give his grandson advice, and one of the things he used to tell me when we went out into his wood shop, when I would try to hurry and take a shortcut, he'd say, Kenny boy, do it right. If it's worth doing, do it right. Well, I think that applies to NASBA as well. We need to do things right, but we also need to do right things. And there is a difference, and that's what I point out in that memo if you read it. I'll give you an example. NASBA, to do things right, has a lot of checkoffs. We have to have legal review, we have to have risk analysis, we have to have budgeting, we have to have planning. Does it fit within our strategic plan? There's a myriad of steps and things that we need to do. Are we transparent with it? Have we got it up the flagpole in front of you at regional meetings? Have we done the things that we get your trust before we make the decision? You know, we've got to do that. But also, we have to make sure that we're doing it right by making sure that we don't take the shortcuts my grandfather warned me about. We have to make sure that you have adequate time to look at these issues, that we have done a good job as your organization to educate you on the issues, to listen to your concerns, to take your feedback, and to not act like we're in ivory tower in Nashville when we make these decisions. It has to be that common interest voice of you that we represent. I heard Carlos mention the book, Who Moved My Cheese? This is a book written by Dr. Spencer Johnson, someone I admire, and the book really does have some natural things that we should consider. There's always a natural resistance to change. I'm a deer hunter. I'm a hunter. When I used to go out when I was a kid, if you're not a deer hunter, I will tell you, one of the best ways to deer hunt is just look for their path, because deer will inevitably always take the same path if they're comfortable. We like to do the same thing. We drive the same way to work. We walk the same way when we go somewhere. It's a natural tendency, and changing makes us uncomfortable. And accountants, by the way, CPAs are often the ones that are most resistant to change. And we understand that's the environment where we live. But you also understand that if we don't change, if we don't try to get to middle ground, if we don't get to a collective voice and consensus and all the things that we want to do, we're not going to put ourselves so much in peril, but we may put our customers, the people that rely on CPAs, more in peril than they deserve. So I hope we consider that. The last one is completely on a different subject, but I want to touch on it this morning. And by the way, thank you for all the people that called me and emailed and texted me to say, okay, I read it, Ken. I mean, I got a lot of those from around the country. The title was Please Read, but this was about the new discussion about the governance of NASBA. I look around this room, I know many of you. There are formidable leaders in this room, great people that have an opportunity to serve. And I want you to, at your board meetings, in your own personal lives, talk about, would I someday like to be one of those guys that you saw get elected, or ladies that was elected today? I would love to plan my career path so that ultimately I get to sit on NASBA board, or I will serve. Now, I will tell you this, and I mentioned this in the article if you read it. Anyone who gets elected to the NASBA Board of Directors wants to come back, and no one wants to go away. That's a great compliment. As CEO of NASBA, I want every person to enjoy their experience as governance, as being on those boards and the officers of NASBA. But more importantly, I want everyone to aspire in NASBA to try to achieve that goal. Every year, when we are out looking for people to run for the office of regional directors, only one or two people pop up. They probably think, I probably can't get it. I don't understand the job. I don't know what the reasons are, but we've got to do a better job of enticing you to be interested in service to NASBA, because I promise you, once you get elected, you're going to want to stay, and you're going to be more fulfilled, more on top of accounting issues in the United States than you ever thought you would be. So again, this is me, an ask. Consider service to NASBA in the future. If you ask me my #1 priority for NASBA, it would always be the same. Every single day I think and talk about how are we going to be successful in gaining and maintaining the trust of all state boards of accountancy. We can only be effective in representing your common interest if we have that trust. I am so proud of the work of Dan Dustin, who is our VP of State Board Relations. I mentioned him earlier. I had the opportunity to travel with him a little bit recently, and I sat in the background and listened to the way that he reported to you and how he works as your advocate of state boards of accountancy. And I was truly pleased at the work that he was doing. But it's also made remarkable success. There are a lot of states and regions represented in this room today that would not have been here if it wasn't for the efforts of NASBA to reach out and really make sure that we want all 55 jurisdictions to be here next year. Michael Savoy, where's Michael Savoy out there? Michael Savoy from California. By the way, a round of applause. This is the first time we've had representation from California in 2 years. Michael, we're so glad you're here. And if you go up and talk to Michael, you're going to find out it wasn't an accident that he's here. We approached the governor, we've approached adversaries, we approached everybody we could approach in California to make it happen that Michael could be here. It's critical that big states like California, small states, all states are participating in NASBA, and I am not going to be satisfied until every one of those people are here and they look at us as the trusted voice of the state boards of accountancy. It's critical for our future success. Okay, we have worked really hard. You heard Kent's report on finances. Well, I'm just going to give you 3 numbers. And I want to tell you, when I'm up here talking about numbers, it isn't bragging. It isn't, you know, attaboy that we were able to score these big numbers. But I want to tell you, the staff of NASBA, the governance of NASBA have worked so hard to improve efficiencies, to do things using IT resources, to maximize effectiveness of the way we do things. I will tell you that we are doing everything that we do for your stakeholders faster, better, and with higher productivity than we've ever done in history, and we're doing it more efficiently, less costs, and that's really hitting our bottom line. But let's talk about some of these numbers. 38 million, you heard 2010, end of 2010, we had $17 million. And some people were saying, wow, that's a lot of money. What's NASBA need with that amount of money? Well, you heard Carlos talking about it a little bit, but in this day and age, NASBA, I mean, if you went out and were hiring a contractor to build your building, I imagine that you would do some due diligence and you'd want to make sure that that company was well funded, that they weren't going to go under somewhere during halfway through your construction. If you're hiring a CPA firm, you want to know they're doing well. Well, we have the resources at NASBA that when we commit to you that we're going to provide you the services and products that we do for you without charge, by the way, that we have the wherewithal to keep that up, to maintain it, to make sure we continue to improve it and make it good for you, and that number helps us get there. The number at the bottom I'll talk about, the $297,000, that is your contribution to NASBA. Each state and territory makes a contribution as dues to NASBA, and the total that we received last year was $297,760. Now, that's a significant amount of money. We thank you for that, and more importantly, we know that you have skin in the game. But the middle number is the amount of money we gave back to you in direct state support last year, the record amount we have ever spent in direct support. I would tell you, I believe your investment, the return on your investment of $297,000 to go to almost $8 million, is a pretty good return on your investment. So I hope you're happy with that return. Okay, what's happening now with NASBA? We've heard on these, but I'm just going to touch on them a little bit from my perspective. The Uniform Accountancy Act. You heard Tommy Berry yesterday, the new chair of the AICPA. I hope you all are hearing her words and others about the spirit of cooperation and trying between our two organizations. We learned some lessons during that dust-up over the financial framework. We can do better than that, folks. We're going to try to get to better ends before we go through those type of issues. You know, one of the things that she said was very important was that AICPA is going to increase NASBA's membership on peak, but more importantly than that, the leadership of both NASBA and AICPA are going to say to our folks on these important committees, pull the stakes out of the ground, trust one another, and try to get to middle ground whenever you can. Let's get to logical places that serve the public, are good public policy, that clearly protect the public, but will be accepted, because having two stakes this far apart, we heard someone gave a speech the other day about people standing in the end zone with bullhorns. Let's get on the 30-yard line, to use their analogy. We need to have serious discussions about closing the gaps and getting together so that we have the UA everywhere. Examination, I hope that you look at the exposure draft that's out there from the AICPA right now about the Uniform CPA exam. That exam is very important to us. It's one of the 3 E's. We rely that entry-level CPAs who come into this new, more complex, more disparate, more onerous profession, really. I mean, think how many standards there are now compared to 10 years ago. I mean, you have to have a highly integrated CPA exam, and I know we're going to get there with the new practice analysis, but please give some feedback on that very important exposure draft, and NASBA can help you with that if you have questions. Continuing professional education. Again, very typically, none of us like change. CPAs particularly don't like change, but we have to talk about what does continuing professional education look like in the future. People who are coming up now, from the time they were in a cradle, probably had an iPad in their lap. These people are they're tech savvy. They think in different ways. They think in short bursts. They learn things on YouTube. They're doing things differently, and they're walking into our world of let's go into a hall and sit there for 50 minutes. We at least have to have an open mind to considering changes in continuing professional education. I'm not convinced yet what the right answer is, but we have to, again, open our minds to things like nano learning. You know, NASBA's coming up ways to help you do automatic CPA enforcement and monitoring and auditing. So a lot of things are going to change in the future. It's too early to declare what's right and what's wrong, but please, let's just look at it and give it a chance. Finally, I'm going to touch on something that has been talked about a little bit. Carlos touched on it particularly, about nominations. I can't say it enough how important it is to me to be a trusted organization. He used the word old boys club. Some of you remember 10 years ago or so, it had a reputation. I'm not going to say whether I believe what the reputation was right or wrong, but the people who met 10 years ago and came up with the new nomination process worked very hard to come up with a nomination process that ensured we would not be looked upon that way by you, our membership. But after 10 years and I've sat through, David Costello, we've sat through many nomination processes. Those people in that room take it very seriously. You would all be proud of the work that takes place in that committee room. But I can tell you there have been bumps in the road, and it can be modernized. We can revisit it. So we shouldn't be afraid after 10 years to kick the tires and see if there's an opportunity to tweak it or make changes even in the bylaws if it comes out of the committee that way, to make sure that it's a transparent, open, and inviting process for any man, woman of any color or creed who wants to have service with NASBA. We're going to take that approach, and we hope the report will be out sometime by probably the first of the year. You know, something else I'm really proud of, and you know, you all know me, I always have an ask, and I've had an ask for several of the last meetings when I've asked every state to please consider using NIES, our International Transcript Evaluation Service, to at least let your board accept that. We now have 50 states that now accept NIS. Thank you very much for listening. I got to tell you, James and his group, his team, they're doing such a remarkable job. Some of you remember the great work that NASBA did several years ago. Milton Brown chaired for years our for-profit subsidiary, PCS. We took that, we grew it from nothing, and we sold it and made millions for NASBA. You talked about in 2011 that huge spike of millions that we made in NASBA. We retained 20% ownership, but I knew when I became CEO, I wanted to have at least one more for-profit entity built in. And I say one more, we may have more than one sometime in the future. We looked at the tremendous success organically. When James was given the opportunity to take NIS from a concept on a piece of paper to a business, I mean, he put heart, soul, his team did in making that successful. We said on the front end, we're probably going to go out and buy a competitor. We're probably going to have to buy another organization that's already doing that so that we can kickstart. Well, today with 50 states and the amount of usage we have something like 60 to 70% of the business organically without ever doing an acquisition. I mean, pretty soon people are going to be coming to us because they want us to buy them. So it's a real change. But we looked at the libraries that we invested in, the software, the IT, the people. We have PhDs now. We have all these folks that are highly educated on that team. We have a capacity that we've never had before at NASBA. So how can we leverage that for a new for-profit? AQUO is the answer. And here's my ask. All of you that are on state boards that have relationship with other state boards, you may know of umbrella agencies that may have similar type programs to the national or to NASBA or Boards of Accountancy. Get some information from James. You know, give us a good word. The great service that we do for your state. If you're happy with what we do for you for CPACE and NIES and other things, share the wisdom about AQUO. I will believe I'm going to be standing up here in a couple of years and tell you that AQUO is an exciting growth business, and we'll probably do another spin-off business from that. So James Sutton, his crew, thank you very much for your success in that area. You know, a lot of people talk about diversity, and we have done some remarkable things at NASBA. We are so proud. We're so proud to have an African-American chair coming in next year. Walter Davenport is a wonderful man. He's going to represent us so well, but it also indicates a lot about what kind of an organization NASBA is. And we aren't just walking the walk. We are doing things around the country. We have our diversity task force that's now been changed to a committee so that we make sure it's going to be ongoing and not just something that is something that we do one year, a one-off. We've met with the leadership of other minority programs to see what can we learn from them and what can they learn for us. We talked about our participation in the PhD program, the Minority PhD Project, rather. That project is designed to say, you know, there's a shortage of accounting CPAs or PhDs. And this is an opportunity for people to enter the profession, have an opportunity to go back to school, get a PhD in business and accounting, solely through the resources that are provided by the organizations that support that. I can also tell you that other organizations are looking at what we're doing. Next week, I'm meeting with FAF, the CEO of FAF, Terry Poley, and FAF is now coming up with a diversity program, even within the standard setters, to say, are we looking at diversification in that area? So I can tell you, NASBA just doesn't walk the walk, NASBA talks the talk. The leadership group, Walter has also agreed to continue that next year so we can finish that project. We have some premier people sitting on that group, and all we talk about is how can we identify, how can we promote, how can we nurture those of you that are leaders to make sure that we put a bright light on you. And let me tell you why. When you nominate someone to be on FASB or GASB or FASAC or many of the things that we do, we've got to make sure they recognize who you are. So early on, we need to identify these leaders. We need to get you up at the podium. We need to get you in other national organizations where you can be seen and known so that when we promote you and put your name up, we have already built some stimulus and some momentum behind you. And that is our goal. So it's something new. We're working on it, but that is what we're talking about. And we hope to have a report from that organization early in the next year. Something else I'm very excited about, some of you may have heard about this already, is that if you have been to our operations in Nashville, we're in a great location. We're a block from the honky tonks. You don't get better than that in Nashville. But it's a wonderful building. Our staff, our urban staff, is an amazing staff, and they live in that area, so we wanted to stay in that area. But we wanted to do some things different. You know, we outgrew our original space in that building. We had to acquire a new floor, and that took us all the way up to the 13th floor. I like to say to our staff, it takes a plane, a train, and a mule to get from the 7th floor to the 13th floor because you have to go all the way down to the bottom floor and then back up on 13. It takes about 15 minutes to get there, and it isn't very conducive to my open door policy to having a collaborative workspace and to do the things that we want to do at NASBA. So we're going to do something really special. We're giving up 13, and we're going to be on floors 6, 7, and 8 of that building. That's going to allow us to build one floor at a time to be an ultra-modern, collaborative workspace, high-speed Wi-Fi, natural light for every single employee, and open spaces that are conducive to people getting together to talk about issues and collaboratively come to agreements. You know, we're also taking 3 different break areas and combining it into one NASBA cafeteria-style workroom so that people from all floors are going to be forced to get together and get to know each other in one place for lunch or breaks and that sort of thing. So we're so excited about that. Michael Bryan has really helped our CFO and Senior Vice President has really kind of led that effort. I can tell you he negotiated a great deal. You know Carlos is always telling you how cheap I am. He's right. We negotiated a lease agreement where we're going to have new furnishings, new collaborative workspace, a lot of glass, a lot of openness, and these new 3 wonderful floors at almost no net cost to NASBA over the period of the lease. So we negotiated a great opportunity, and I'm very, very proud of that. You know, NASBA is in a great place. You know, we have efficiently and we have an effective operations. We're lean, we're mean. We have a greatly improved IT system. You heard our auditors talking about how sound our IT system, the great work that Cheryl Farrar, our CIO, is doing. And we also have this great staff that ranges from people that, like again, we have capacity and people at NASBA we never dreamed of having. So now that I can step back a little bit, or we can step back, and it's time to be visionary and think about the future. What can NASBA be? Where can we go? You know, we are so excited that we are hearing from you other things that you would like to see NASBA encounter. More IT support, helping you with contracts, the things you want. How can we fulfill anything that we can do to make state boards more effective and more efficient in what you do as state boards of accountancy? I want to end my remarks by saying something that I always want to say when I speak to you. NASBA is mission-driven. NASBA is member-focused, and NASBA exists only for you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.